So now move to leaders' questions. Deputy Doherty.
Agus is na plan an rialtas bag na €11 million eiclin na sar tíhiachta nua hon pasta wrenchlis an ara tíhiachta tan pobl inta faraga mar yalar seo agus ní horga rahau sha ray ní féidir le dunne bí an chasas seo hasan agus ní horga ní rahau lish eliascan cordia toniste €430,000. That's the off-the-wall salary that your government is planning to pay the new housing SAR to come in and basically job share with the Housing Minister, James Brown. A few words have already been written and used to describe this decision. Absurd, extravagant, scandalous has been used. I'll add another one, embarrassing, because that's what the government should be, embarrassed that you were prepared to pay someone nearly €500,000 to take up what is the main responsibilities of the Minister for Housing. The Minister for Housing himself said that this housing SAR will come up, and I quote, with rapid responses from all angles and unlocking housing delivery via a targeted team of experts. Taoiseach, does the Housing Minister not realise that that's his job that he's describing? That's his actual job. It's farcical stuff. The Taoiseach lectures the opposition that this whopping €430,000 won't cost the public any additional money. He says because the government's preferred candidate, Brendan McDonagh, is already receiving the salary as the head of NAMA. But the Taoiseach's claim that the public won't cough up for this gold-plated salary appears not to be true. Because this morning it's come to light that following the winding down of NAMA, which is happening this year, McDonagh is due to return to his role in the NTMA at a significantly reduced salary. So the taxpayer will foot the bill for this madcap salary. Isn't that not the truth, Taoiseach? There has been much speculation as well that Fine Gael aren't happy. The media has been briefed of rows at Cabinet. Fine Gael backbenchers are apparently up in arms that you yourself were blindsided by this bonkers decision and the process that was involved. Now come off the stage, Taoiseach. There's no blindsiding going on here. This appointment and the name of Brendan McDonagh has been flagged as the lead candidate for nearly 2 months now in the national media. So either you were very much on board or you were asleep at the wheel. So which one was it? Were you just oblivious to everything that's been written and been said for the last 6 weeks? Or is this really just an attempt by Fine Gael to dress this up as a Fianna Fáil solo run and a PR job because you recognise there's a public backlash in relation to this? Ordinary people are shaking their heads, they're sick to their stomach in disbelief. This is happening at a time when so many are finding it difficult to make ends meet, hit by rip-off bill after rip-off bill, at a time when working people, when our young people are struggling to find a home or keep a roof over their heads. And it's a real slap in the face for them. And it's also not lost on anybody that this is happening on this day, International Workers' Day, when your government is breaking its election promises on increasing the minimum wage to the living wage and rowing back on your pledge to increase paid sick days for workers. Taoiseach, I know the Cabinet Subcommittee on Housing is meeting today on this embarrassing idea to have a job share for the Housing Minister. So are you going to come to your senses? Are you going to call stop on this absurd idea to pay someone hundreds of thousands of euro to do what is the job of the Housing Minister, which he's already well paid for? Because if this idea goes ahead, and if you think that you've seen a backlash now, Taoiseach, well, get ready, because you haven't seen anything yet.
Thanks, Deputy Johnson.
Well, thanks very much to Deputy Doherty for raising this important issue, because I think we all agree that housing is the most important issue, and there is a housing emergency in this country, and there's an onus on all of us to come forward with ideas and policies to try and make real and meaningful progress for people in the country, and I hope we're at least united in relation to this. And of course, this government has taken a number of steps since coming to office only months ago in relation to housing, including publishing an implementation plan for the Planning and Development Act, including publishing draft legislation in terms of the short-term letting and the regulating of that sector, bringing forward proposals in relation to exempted development and how you can make it easier for people who want to construct developments, particularly on their own land and in their own gardens, and indeed having a new housing plan by the summer recess, and indeed the Cabinet Committee on Housing will meet on that issue today. We've also published the new National Planning Framework, Las Corla, which has been before this House this week, and indeed the other House, which is absolutely key in ensuring that we have enough zoned land right across our country to build homes. But let's be very clear. We all know that when it comes to the building homes for our people and getting people out of box rooms, that one of the key barriers people are finding in relation to construction is silos. That there's a site here, but there mightn't be a water connection, there mightn't be a wastewater connection, there might be an ESB challenge, there might be a blockage here or there. And when we set up the Housing Commission in the last government, it itself recognised this, and it itself called for structures to be put in place. It talked about a housing delivery oversight executive office to bring in expertise, to bring in people from different utility companies to say, how are we going to unblock that site and get that built more quickly? And in fact, to be honest, you yourself are in favour of that idea. And that's why I'm a little bit surprised at your opposition to the idea of setting up this office, because on page 98 of the Sinn Féin housing plan, you don't talk about job shares or anything else, you talk about setting up a housing delivery oversight executive to bring forward exactly what we now want to do as well. You talk about bringing forward it ultimately on a statutory basis, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that, but you do talk about setting it up in the first instance. You do talk about it in the first instance.
Where's the housing czar?
Hang on. Sorry, that's Gordon. You will, no, sorry, well, there's no housing czar for us either. You will talk about, you talk about this, you talk about, no, hang on a second. I love the way you love to laugh and joke about the issue of housing. You yourself proposed in the general election that if you got elected to government, and thank God we were spared that, if you got elected to government, you would establish a new office to bring forward all of the different structures to break down silos. That's what you proposed. The Housing Commission proposed that, and you know what? So did the government. And when we got together after the election and formed our programme for government, we said we'd take on board what seemed like a sensible idea. Bring in and second people, bring in expertise, and try to get home building accelerated. That is a good idea. And on Tuesday at the Cabinet, we agreed to establish that office. Something very similar to you yourself wanted on page 98. That is the only decision we have made. We haven't made any decisions in relation to personnel or pay. No decisions at all. And let me say this, process matters in relation to all of those issues. And we will continue to engage as a government now that we've made the decision on establishing the new office on how best to staff that office. And the overriding objective won't be personality. The overriding objective will be getting the job done, making sure that people who live in the box rooms, their mums and dads' homes, can move out and get their own home. And we're taking on board good suggestions from the Housing Commission. Heaven forbid, we might even be taking on board a reasonably good suggestion from yourself in terms of actually trying to establish a unit just like this. And I'm quite surprised that you seem to be so against it today.
Honestly, who are you trying to fool? Seriously, like you just stood up there and barefaced say, there's no housing czar in our plan. Is that what you're trying to say? Do you know what your housing minister went on RTE yesterday? Was it Radio 1 and News at 1 and said, Brendan McDonagh is our preferred candidate. You talked about, there's no candidates, they're not. The idea that there's not been conversations with Brendan McDonagh is absolutely nonsense. The idea that you didn't know about, did you not read the Sunday Business Post 6 weeks ago when Brendan McDonagh's name was? Or what about Jack Horkins-Jones' piece a month ago? Like the idea that you're blindsided in relation to this here is just nonsense. You are proposing a housing czar, you are proposing a salary of €430,000. That's what was on the table, on the cards here. There's Minister James Lawless was talking, a minister at the Cabinet was talking in Kildare this morning, talking about, yes, it's a big salary. This is understood, and yet you're trying to backtrack now in relation to a public outlash in relation to this here. So I put it to you, a housing czar is a daft idea because it is the housing minister should be doing that job in the first instance. But I put it to you, what salary are you willing to accept to pay this housing czar? What salary do you believe is appropriate? Is it 300,000? Is it 350? Is it 400,000? Is it 430? Minister, can you please give clarity to the Irish people in relation to your thinking in relation to this? Or will you just wait to see what way the wind blows and then decide to go with it and pretend you were never on board in the first instance?
Well, no, I'm very on board for setting up a housing activation office, and I thought you were too. Page 98 of your own plan. Break down the silos. Page 98, it's there for all to see. Break down silos, bring in expertise. I'm not sure whether you read the policies or not, but that's what you all ran in the election on. You all ran in the election, and you said you ran in the election that you wanted to establish an office to bring together people to break down silos in relation to housing. That's what we're doing. It wasn't your idea, it wasn't our idea. It was a good idea that came from the Housing Commission. And we're trying to act on that. And the Minister was quite right this week to bring forward a proposal to the Cabinet to move that forward. The only decision the Government of Ireland took this week was in relation to that. Now that the Government of Ireland has done that, we will now decide how best to populate the office. Process matters. I want to understand the process that's followed in relation to key personnel. and then we will address all of those matters and put this together. That is the appropriate way. That is the appropriate way. Of course, people who do a job will be paid a salary, but this isn't about personalities. In the first instance, this is getting things right. And speculation in the media is not how we do things in relation to government. We bring forward proposals, we tease them through, we consider them, and that's exactly what we will do. That's exactly what we will do in the hours ahead, in the days ahead, and we will get this right. But a housing activation office to break down silos is important, and getting the right people in place is also important.
Thank you. Now move on to Deputy Ivana Bacik.
I wish everyone today a happy May Day. Many workers across the state are looking forward to a day off on Monday, a public holiday introduced by the Labour Party to mark International Workers' Day. And it's important that we mark this day. Its purpose is more than just to celebrate the progress made for workers' rights in the last 100 years, because May Day is also when we shine a light on the continued exploitation, poverty and inequality experienced by far too many people still. Taoiseach, today we think of all those working families who are struggling to pay their bills. We heard only yesterday that a spike in food prices last month has pushed our annual inflation rate to 2%, and more people are struggling to make ends meet in a cost of living crisis. And Taoiseach, I think that's partly why there's been such uproar about the outrageous, almost €500,000 salary proposed for Fianna Fáil's housing maverick, a housing oligarch, a housing tsar with a Russian oligarch price tag. You might call it a fixer-in-chief, or even a fixer with a nixer. And what an extraordinary nixer this is. It's interesting to hear you and Fine Gael colleagues distancing yourselves from this, and indeed I think people will be glad to hear that you've just said no decision has been made yet on how to populate this new office. Because Taoiseach, when households are so stretched, people do need reassurance from government. And on the issue of reassurance, you need to give workers a reprieve on low pay. Those who are on low pay need to have hope for the future. This year marks 25 years since the introduction of the minimum wage. It's 10 years since Labour and my colleague Deputy Jed Nash established the Low Pay Commission with the support of your party, Fine Gael. And the Low Pay Commission has done a good job. Thanks to its evidence-based approach, we've seen 9 successive increases in the minimum wage, so that each year those on the lowest salaries have been given more money in their pockets to pay for basic necessities and to put aside for the future, because that should be our common goal. To ensure that workers in this country are not just living to work because they must spend every waking hour toiling to cover their costs, but that they're able to work to live. Taoiseach, those minimum wage increases would not have happened without the Low Pay Commission. They wouldn't have happened where your party left to your own devices, and I say that not to cause offence, because in fact your recent record in workers' rights is stronger than your partners in Fianna Fáil. At the first sniff of a previous economic downturn, Fianna Fáil leapt to cut the minimum wage shamefully by €1. But Taoiseach, your government must do more now. Lowest paid workers in Ireland were promised a living wage by 2026, calculated at €14.75 an hour, a floor beneath which no one should fall. Very disappointingly, Minister Peter Burke has moved the goalposts, shifting that deadline again, this time to 2029. He cited the need to take account of competitiveness issues, but that's a red herring here, Taoiseach. The Low Pay Commission is already required by law to take competitiveness into account under Section 6 of the Act. So, Taoiseach, instead of trying to pin competitiveness issues on the lowest paid workers in the state, will you commit to honouring the Low Pay Commission's approach and stick with that 2026 deadline? Give workers a hope on May Day, a hope for the future to move them out of a poverty trap.
Well, thanks very much, Deputy Bacik, and happy International Workers' Day too. And I want to acknowledge all the incredible work done by workers right across our country, in the public service, in the private sector as well, all the many people who work here in Leinster House helping our democracy function on a daily basis. And I think objectively it's fair to say there's been a lot of positive measures taken, as indeed you've referenced, in recent years to support workers. Our minimum wage in Ireland has been increased by over 33% in the last 5 years, and if I'm correct, I think we now have the second highest minimum wage in Europe. We have introduced statutory sick pay. 2 years ago, we lived in a country where there was no statutory sick pay scheme. We have pay-related benefits, which I think is a really important reform, took effect just at the end of March, and this provides again a greater safety net to workers if they lose their jobs. And I'm very pleased to say that auto-enrolment will be introduced from the 1st of January 2026. I want to acknowledge the proposals that my colleague Minister Calleary brought forward in relation to that to Cabinet this week. This will ensure that workers right across our country will have greater financial security and comfort in their retirement. And I actually think it's addressing a real divide that's existed in relation to pensions in this country for a very, very long time. We've also had other important changes, indeed a new public holiday on St Bridget's Day introduced in 2023, and we passed legislation to ensure that employers must distribute tips fairly amongst their employees. I think changes like remote working have had a really positive impact on many workers, though I know we continue to work through all of the change that brings about together as well. But I think largely it's been very positive for many workers, and certainly many people that I meet as I go about my business as well. We've made progress on things like parental leave, paternity leave. We've published through Minister Burke's work for consultation an action plan on collective bargaining, which has been one of the key asks, I think, of the union movement in their engagement with government in recent time. And I must say more broadly, I'm very pleased that we now have the Labour Employer Engagement Forum, the LEAF, which works very, very well, chaired by the Taoiseach, attended by myself, Finance Ministers, Minister Burke, Mr Cleary, relevant ministers, as the issues arise, in terms of teasing through in a collaborative way a range of issues that relate to our economy, enterprise and the likes. And I think that's a structure that works quite well too. Of course, government always has to balance all of these things by making sure that we hear the concerns of our small businesses, of our medium businesses, of Indigenous-owned businesses across the country. And they should never be pitted against each other. I do take that point, because employers know that actually looking after their employees well is in their interest for a whole variety of reasons as well. So this government will see further minimum wage increases, will see the ongoing work of the Low Pay Commission, and I acknowledge the work done by your colleague Deputy Nash in relation to that. And we do want to see a living wage introduced by 2029.
Deputy Bacik.
Well, Taoiseach, I've certainly acknowledged positive advances that have been made for workers' rights, fought for and campaigned for by trade unions and the trade union movement, of course. But at a time when we're seeing significant divisions emerging between you and your senior coalition partner in Fianna Fáil, I think this is the time for you to carve out a space on workers' rights that emphasises the difference between you and Fianna Fáil, not just on fixers with nixers, but on actually things that matter to working people. Because your predecessor, Leo Varadkar, spoke very positively about workers' rights. You've spoken very positively about workers' rights. This can be a difference you can make in government, Taoiseach. And that's why it's so disappointing to see one of your ministers now talking about delaying that necessary move to a living wage to 2029 and citing competitiveness as a reason for doing so. Minister Burke, you know the issues that are really affecting competitiveness in this country: lack of infrastructure, chronic housing shortage and spiralling energy bills. That's what's driving competitiveness issues for small businesses, for our economy, not low-paid workers. They shouldn't be bearing the brunt of a cost of living crisis.
So I want to assure you that the government is very unified in wanting to support our workers, and wanting to obviously support our economy, and wanting to protect their jobs too. And I agree. I mean, low-pay workers and workers in this country are certainly not responsible for the many turbulent challenges the global economy may face and the impact that may have on our. I take that point. I think the union. We're very lucky to live in a country where our union movement was very constructive in its engagement, even during the darkest days of the financial crisis. I want to acknowledge that on International Workers' Day. It doesn't mean we always agree with them, or they agree with us. I don't want to kill their street cred, but it is important that we have that constructive engagement, and I do acknowledge that too. But in relation to the living wage, this was about trying to calibrate it correctly. It has been, not by you, but it has sometimes been misrepresented or misdiscussed in recent days, as though the minimum wage won't continue to rise, as though the journey towards the living wage won't continue. It will. We will continue to see the minimum wages increase. And in fact, at present, we have wage growth in Ireland of about 3.5% to 4% and inflation of about 1.7%. So we are back now seeing real wage growth, people's incomes going back up. And we are also now trying to help in other ways too. Things like hot school meals, free school books are of course benefiting everybody, but also benefiting our low-paid workers, and we'll continue our positive agenda in relation to this.
Thank you, now move to Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks, that's Ken Corla. One of the first protests I ever went on was to demand the introduction of a minimum wage. At that stage, there was no minimum wage. Bosses could pay what they liked. But that campaign won, and 25 years ago, a national minimum wage was introduced. Scandalously, the minimum wage included provision for legal discrimination against young workers, and that inequality continues to this day. Around 15,000 young people in this country are legally paid less than the minimum wage. We have a national minimum wage of $13.50 an hour, less than the living wage, a wage which makes possible a minimum livable standard of living, and the road to that living wage is getting longer under this government. But bosses are allowed to pay 19-year-olds 10% less than that inadequate wage. 18-year-olds can get 20% less, and 17-year-olds and younger can be paid 30% below the minimum wage, an insulting $9.45 an hour. When they go to pay for groceries, they don't get 30% off the bill. If a 19-year-old is renting, they can't take 10% off the rent. They don't get a young person's discount on petrol. It is blatant discrimination for young workers doing the same work as their colleagues. In the Oireachtas Committee, employers group ISME claimed that they are in loco parentis over young workers who, quote, may favour gratification before learning how to budget. Bosses are actually doing young workers a favour by underpaying them, otherwise they might waste the money on sweets. ISME also revealed the real reason that they want to keep sub-minimum wages. They said if young workers get the full minimum wage, this will have a spillover impact on other workers' pay demands. In other words, it's about wage suppression for all workers. 2 years ago, we in People Before Profit proposed a bill to do away with this legalised super exploitation. It passed second stage, but with a timed amendment from the government to delay it by a year. The excuse for the delay was that the Low Pay Commission was due to report on these sub-minimum wage rates. Well, the Low Pay Commission did report last March, and it recommended that sub-minimum wages should be abolished. Were they then abolished? No. The can was kicked down the road again with an economic impact assessment. I asked the Minister for an update about the progress of this assessment and got a PQ back on Tuesday saying it won't be finished until June, but that regardless of that, quote, the government has agreed to defer any decision on sub-minimum youth rates of the national minimum wage, i.e. you are going to continue with legalised super exploitation of young people. Even after the Dáil voted to end it, even after the Low Pay Commission recommended that it be done away with, before the economic impact assessment that you commissioned has even been completed. Tánaiste, on May Day, on International Workers' Day, will you please reverse course on your anti-worker agenda? Will you commit to equal pay for young workers?
So, thank you very much, Deputy Murphy. I don't think anybody can credibly suggest that this government is anti-worker. In fact, there's many more workers in this country as a result of this government's efforts and successive government's efforts to create jobs in every town, every village, every city right across our island. And indeed, to have workers, you need to have jobs. And there's many, many more people in employment. Many of us remember days in this House where actually the biggest challenge being raised on leaders' questions and every other opportunity in this House was people couldn't get a job. In Ireland, very high unemployment rates, and we've worked extremely hard to get to a much better place, to get to a place of effective full employment, and that's something we should never, ever, ever take for granted. It's something we can't be complacent about, and we have to work day in and day out to make sure that businesses remain viable, and that many of the businesses, I certainly thought, and I don't know whether you were directly quoting people here, but language about sweeties and all that sort of stuff is just utterly offensive to young people in our country who work bloody hard and play a very good role in so many parts of our economy. But I also know that many of the businesses that they disproportionately work in, often part-time, often during college and the likes, are businesses that are really to the pin of their collar in relation to trying to keep the doors open. And I challenge you to call into a cafe in your own constituency, call into a hotel in your own constituency, call into a restaurant in your own constituency, and as I'm sure you do, and I'm sure you'll hear from them the challenges that they face in meeting the pay bill. I'm sure you'll see in cafes across the country, as I do, sometimes reduced opening hours. And one of the reasons when you talk to an employer they'll cite is the fact of trying to keep down the cost. So one of the things this government is collectively doing, across parties, across the independents, with Minister Burke, is to look at the whole issue of how we can help businesses with the cost of doing business. And of course that's against a backdrop, not of wage suppression, which again you referenced but simply isn't the case. It's against a backdrop of a minimum wage that's increasing year on year, that will increase again, no doubt, in the years ahead and in the year ahead, that has increased by 33% over the last 5 years, that is now the second highest minimum wage rate in Europe, and now back in a country, and I accept this wasn't always the way in recent years with very high inflation, but now back, thankfully, at a position where wage growth is exceeding inflation and exceeding it effectively. So in other words, the extra money people are getting in terms of wages is now outstripping any increases in the cost of living as well. So it's wrong to say the Dáil voted for this. The Dáil allowed a timed amendment for a bill to progress at second stage. So to people who follow these things, that's not the same as saying the Dáil passed a law in relation to this. There's no suppression of a decision in relation to that. The Minister has outlined the process he's taking, but he's also outlined very honestly, as he should be, that he is also trying to get a balance right here. A balance right to make sure that young people across Ireland have access to employment, to make sure that the companies and the businesses that they're working in can keep their own doors open. And of course we'll continue to keep these things under review. And there's many ways we're helping young people with their own cost of living, with their education opportunities, with the reduction in college fees and the likes, and we want to obviously continue on that positive trajectory.
Deputy Murphy.
Thanks. Taoiseach, I don't think it's credible to suggest that this government is anything other than anti-worker. Look at your actions in just the past few weeks. The delay of a promised extension of sick leave. I remember debating the sick leave legislation here. I remember us saying the extension of time should be in the legislation, and the government saying, no, we don't need to write it in, but don't worry, we will extend it. A government that is delaying the introduction of a promised living wage. And now a government that is standing over a situation of legalised super exploitation of young people. Taoiseach, you're saying it's okay for people, workers under 20, doing the same work as colleagues beside them, to be paid less than the minimum wage. I have no problem going into cafes, restaurants, shops in my constituency and saying, no, it's not okay to pay people less than the minimum wage. Surely the government should be in a position to do that. And I would say that the justification that you're giving for why you're going to continue with this super exploitation of young people, and I ask how long is this delay going to be, is not legitimate. It is, the Low Pay Commission looked at it and said it would not stand up. It does not amount to a legitimate aim and would therefore not be legal under the EU directive on adequate minimum wages. That the sub-minimum that if you have exceptions, they need to be in pursuit of a legitimate aim, and that pursuance of cost savings for employers does not count as that, whereas that's clearly the agenda you're setting out.
So it's not that anybody's breaching the minimum wage. It's that we have a tiered system of minimum wages in this country, and you and I have different views on that. But people are following the minimum wage. It's just tiered and applies differently to different people at different age brackets, and that's the system that we have had in place. And after you go into that cafe owner, and after you say that to them and outline your view, and then you walk off home and go back to doing your job as a TD, they're the one left having to pay the bill. They're the one left having to go, how am I going to keep the doors open? How am I going to continue? How am I going to continue? And we support young people in so many ways. There wasn't, and I've heard this, I found myself having to shout at the radio the other day about broken promises in relation to statutory sick pay. Read the Fine Gael manifesto. We were very clear in the election in relation to 5 days of statutory sick pay. It's there in black and white. We made it clear to people. There wasn't a statutory sick pay scheme in this country 2 years ago. There is now. There will be auto-enrolment in terms of pension provisions from next January thanks to the work of this government. We are moving towards a living wage. We have the second highest minimum wage in Europe. It's risen by more than 33% over the last 5 years. We're reducing childcare. We've taken measures in relation to hot school meals, school books, reducing college fees, and we've crucially done something really important, created jobs, providing people with employment right across the length and breadth of this country, and that should never be taken for granted.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Now move to Deputy O'Donoghue. Before you commence, Deputy, I just want to acknowledge the family of Deputy Brennan Wexford and Wicklow, who are here in the gallery on this special day for his mum, Anne, who is 91 years of age. You're all very welcome. I hope you enjoy your day.
Thank you, Leslie Corla. Minister, today on International Workers' Day, I just wanted to say to you, based on carbon tax, and I just want to give you a few figures for yourselves, and as you know I like figures. There's 3.2 million vehicles in this country. And I want to talk about the speed limits that you brought in. National roads, 5,413 kilometres, no change. National secondary roads, 2,696. Regional roads, 13,122. And local roads equals 81,293 kilometres of local roads. And one strike of a pin, you've reduced the local roads down to 60 kilometres. So where I'm going, some of these roads are 6 metres wide. But rather than come in and say, lads, we've roads that are unsafe, let our local authority say, this road is 3 metres wide, reduce it. This road is not safe, reduce it. You've done a blanket ban across all local roads. 81,293 kilometres of road at 60k. How do we work that into brass tacks? If you work out the average vehicles, and I have myself, that gives every vehicle on the local roads, 3.2 million vehicles. I even reduced this back to 50%, back to 1.5 million. 17 gallons they're using extra based on the mileage that you would be doing. 24,000 on a diesel, 17,000 on a petrol vehicle. They're burning 17 gallons more. And we're rising carbon tax. Now when we go to our Europeans, and we're going to be paying fines for not meeting our carbon tax. We're now taxing people more by reducing speed limits in areas that you can actually get up to a decent speed limit. But you're travelling across the country now in fourth gear in the car. Fourth gear, because I've checked all the averages of all the cars across the country, and it's fourth gear, over 81,293 kilometres is what you're in. On a 5-speed, on a 6-speed car, and even your automatic 7 speeds. It's 4th to 5th gear on a 7-speed, between a 5-speed gearbox and a 6-speed gearbox, you're in 4th gear. That means you're burning more fuel. That means causing more emissions, and you're rising carbon tax for people. That's what I'm looking at. So it's not saving lives, and Minister, not putting people at 60 kilometres in a road that is not safe to do so, you're saving lives. In a 6-metre wide road, do you realise what 6 metres is? That's from me over here to the Taoiseach. That's the width of the road you're talking about. But you've done a blanket ban across the country on local roads. I'm asking you, reduce speed limits on roads that are unsafe, and then put in the appropriate speed limits on roads that are safe. But you've just done it across the whole sector.
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was taking a lot of figures there, but I appreciate you've done a lot of work, Deputy O'Donoghue, and thank you in relation to that. Look, I think the debate, and I think the purpose of your question is largely around the whole issue of carbon tax, but on the issue of speed limits, I mean, it is about trying to get this right. It is about recognising that far too many people, and we all share this view, far too many people die on Irish roads. The progress, being very honest, the progress that we had made as a country is now at best stalled. And indeed in recent years has gone backwards. And we all know and think of far too many tables that have an empty seat around them. And the speed limits issue is about trying to get that right, because speed kills. And certainly as politicians, certainly as a politician, I like to rely on the expert advice and input of the likes of the Road Safety Authority in terms of how we get this right. But I do think it's important that we empower on local roads, particularly the local authorities, because they sometimes have that degree of local knowledge in terms of recognising the safety of roads, and can feed in positively to that too. Look, in relation to carbon, I think we've got to be very honest in relation to the climate debate in this country. We have a huge amount of work to do to get our country to where it needs to be, to get Europe to where it needs to be in relation to climate action. And one part, and it's a small part of the overall piece of work that has to be done, is in relation to carbon tax and in relation to what that revenue is used for. And I know you'd be on to ministers' offices on behalf of your constituents in Limerick, no doubt, and you'd be talking about the fuel allowance, and you'd be talking about the retrofitting. And I'm very pleased to say that a lot of the money that's collected through the carbon tax is now going back into that. So what it is trying to do is make sure that there is a fairness to this. That Minister Cleary's department, as one example, is seeing that a lot of people who, in terms of expanding the fuel allowance, the funding of that is coming directly from carbon tax. So sometimes people wonder, when I pay this, where does it go? Well, actually, it is being used to try and make sure that those most in need of keeping warm, thankfully we have a nice day today, but those most in need of keeping warm can do that, and also making sure from a climate point of view that we make it easier for people to meet the cost and the need in terms of retrofitting their own home as well. So we have a fundamental policy disagreement on this, and I recognise that up front, but we've been very clear in relation to the Climate Change Advisory Council's recommendation, in relation to the recommendation of the scientific experts that feed into them, and we do use climate tax as one of a number of measures to try and get Ireland to where it needs to be in relation to climate action.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And I'm glad that you said that the local authorities should have had a part to play in this, which they didn't. And that's what I've asked for, is that the local authorities make the decisions on the roads that are safe and not safe to do it, and not across. 89% of the vehicles in this country are petrol and diesel. How many of you over there are driving petrol and diesel? Come on, be honest. 89% of the vehicles in Ireland are petrol and diesel. 89% of the people that you're overtaxing are the working people that are actually in this country that you're talking about the minimum wage. These are the people that you're overtaxing. And then what you do is you put another liability on top of them on local road tax. So you're taxing the same people that you're trying to help. I'm asking for common sense. And my common sense was, when I said it to you, was local roads, give it to the local authorities, let them look at the rating and speed them. That's common sense. That means you have a tier system, right? The Road Safety Authority have to do their job, but the local roads is local information. Also, when it comes to taxing, what you've done is you're overtaxing people already that are on a breadline that can't put food on their table. Again, I'm looking for pay parity for everyone.
Thanks, Deputy.
Remember, these are the working people that we're talking about here.
I often say it myself that we need more common sense in politics. The problem is common sense is a subjective concept. I actually think there is common sense. I think there is common sense in collecting revenue through a carbon tax and specifically doing what our programme for government commits very honestly, very upfront. It says we're going to continue to use carbon tax revenues to fund social welfare measures, in other words, those most in need, agri-environmental schemes, in other words, helping our farmers, not lecturing them, not talking down to them, helping them in terms of the adaptations that they need to make to continue to produce some of the best food produce in the world, and retrofitting, helping make people's homes more environmentally friendly, more warm and cheaper to eat. That's where we're trying to get to. I think we also have to be honest when it comes to climate. There isn't much low-hanging fruit. There is a climate emergency. The planet is on fire. We're trying to take pragmatic, practical measures to help move the dial in relation to the changes we need to make in Ireland.
We now move to. Let's get it up here. Mm-hmm.